20 at 5:30 for a moment of silence. Let's just have a moment of silence for the COVID-19 deaths that occurred in the last 2 weeks. Thank you. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. LeBlanc,
Here.
Mr. Salazar,
Here.
Mr. Rutledge,
Here.
Mrs. Costa,
Here.
Mrs. LeBlanc,
Here.
Mrs. Hall,
Here.
Mrs. Thurston, Mr. Ryder,
Here.
Chairman Kruzel.
Here. Thank you. We'll start number 4, superintendent's report. Mr. Drezek.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to go through the latest updates as quickly as I can. But obviously, since the last time we met, Governor Lamont has canceled all classes, in-person classes for the remainder of the school year. So as you know, we're going to continue with our distance and virtual learning program for the remainder of this academic year. There's been a lot of information going out directly from the schools. I'll highlight just some of the larger points here tonight. And I'll ask if anyone has specific questions that we can either guide them directly from the school buildings. Like I said, last time we met, it seems that we're getting better clarification for parents and for students if the information is coming from their principal or from their teachers as opposed to coming from me. So I'm trying to keep my updates at an overview level, more granular at the schools. One of the big topics of conversation over the last few days has been the last few weeks, or since the announcement that there would be no more in-person classes for this year, obviously, is what to do for our Enfield High School graduation ceremony. A short time ago, Ms. Clark sent a message out to all seniors regarding caps and gown distribution. And there's currently a plan for students to pick up their caps and gowns taking place this coming Thursday, the 14th. And students are asked to show up during designated times alphabetically to pick up their caps and gowns. And also, class dues have been waived, so there will be no charge for caps and gowns this year. I thought it was important for students to know that. And kind of connected to that, I had a conversation with Principal Clark a short time ago, and some of the feedback that she's getting from her seniors is that there seems to be some interest in seniors to maybe not pick up their caps and gowns on Thursday. And it's all coming from a good place, with the hope that if they don't pick up their caps and gowns, they could sort of avoid this virtual ceremony that we're planning and hold out hopes that if we don't get the caps and gowns, we can have a traditional graduation for them. It's clever. So I just want to remind everyone that might be watching at home, particularly members of the board, that as of this moment, Executive Order 7 still stands from Governor Lamont, which that executive order is essentially the law that we must all abide. And that prohibits gatherings of more than 5 people. And we realize that there's a lot of questions about in-person gatherings, but I just want to make everyone know that as of this moment, we're not permitted to do any sort of in-person ceremony. I do have a call. I just was notified this afternoon that Connecticut State Department of Ed leadership, as well as State Department of Health leadership, is having a conference call with superintendents on Friday with the topic of graduation. So I expect I'll get more information on the requirements for graduation ceremonies, but in talking with my colleagues, this is the #1 topic that everyone's discussing at the moment. But I have to remind everyone that at this moment, we really don't have a choice but to plan for the possibility that we won't be able to hold or be permitted to hold a traditional ceremony. And we do have a plan in place right now for a virtual ceremony. Ms. Clark and her team at Enfield High School have been working around the clock. Believe me, I get the emails at all hours of the night to put together the best possible program for our kids. And although we realize that nothing compares to a regular traditional graduation ceremony, but given the circumstances, we're trying to send our seniors off in a way that's the most memorable for them and their families. Ms. Clark's going to be sending out details in the coming days, but we've been putting together a plan in place for seniors to have a drive-through type of distribution of their diplomas in front of Enfield High School and talking with the kids and getting feedback. There's a lot of opinions out there about how to do this. anywhere from delivering the diplomas to their kids' homes or having them come to the school in some safe capacity to get their diploma. Program that we've gone with and had a discussion with board leadership about is having that drive-through ceremony in front of Enfield High School so students can get their diploma. They can walk across a stage that still adheres to the social distancing guidelines, and then allow opportunities for photographs for families to take pictures of their kids in their caps and gowns on a stage in front of their school. And I know we're working with SafeGrad as well, so they can distribute some prizes for students in the same rotational manner. I realize that this is far from perfect, given the rules that we're now forced to adhere to and the size of the class. This appeared to be the best option to give our kids the best experience we can. Look, I have to say this, and it pains me too, because I think all of our hearts are breaking for these kids. And when I tell you, not that this has anything to do with me, but I understand the pain that kids are feeling, because I'm living with a junior daughter who already had her junior prom dress. And we're having those same conversations in our house. I can only imagine we may be in the same position next year. We don't know. So I understand the pain that families and that kids are feeling right now. The fear that we have is that if we just strictly postpone until some future date in the summer and don't plan for a virtual celebration, the reality is our kids could get nothing. There are some districts that are rolling the dice at this point to say, we're just going to postpone it until August 8th. That's a Friday. We could do that. But if we postpone and for some reason we're told we're not permitted to have an in-person gathering, we're going to miss the window to something in June for these kids. So we've contracted with a Hollywood-based virtual company that is going to run and produce the live stream graduation ceremony. There's a lot of bells and whistles that go with this particular company. This was the best one out there. They were the most expensive, but we thought it was most important to get the best opportunity we could for these kids. Ms. Clark's going to be sending out some more of the details about the enhancements that we're getting through the program. And one of the things we're hoping to do is when we distribute the diplomas, we're able to have our photographer there as well, so that students can take their picture on a stage with a cap and gown. So during the virtual ceremony, that would be the photo that would be on the screen for everyone to see. And we're going to try to live stream that on ETV as well as on our own designated website through the community. I wanted everyone to know that we haven't just been sitting back waiting and hoping that we're going to have a graduation come, July or August. I have to be honest that the conversations I've had over the past week with health professionals, no one is giving any of us any confidence that these restrictions that we're currently living under are going to be lifted at any point this summer, particularly when it comes to large group gatherings. So, and I'll get into that further, just so that there's a better understanding about where the direction and conversations are now going. But they're beyond talking about opportunities over the summertime. We're starting to talk about what the fall is going to look like. And talking with our local health experts, talking with folks at the State Department of Ed, no one is giving us any guarantees or assurances that traditional outdoor, socially distanced events with large amounts of people are going to be allowed anytime soon. One superintendent actually is putting out that they're doing their graduation virtually, and they're scheduling it for 2021 for anyone who wants to come back. Because right now the information is just, nothing is even remotely concrete that part of normal society is going to get back on track anytime soon. Dr. Carter was on our last call, and he, like I'm sure you all watched the news, said they still anticipate a spike at some point in August. And our fear is if we plan this for August 8th, and the health department told me this to my face, well, virtually to my face, I can't promise you that I wouldn't call you at 2 o'clock on August 8th and say you're not having it because there's an extra case in town or a spike or here, wherever it may be. So the risks of not planning a virtual event for June, we didn't want to take that risk to have nothing for our kids. And I think that message is going to start being portrayed a little bit more through the school to the kids, where I know this isn't what you want to do, but right now this is the best option. We're all going to hold out hope that the cloud gets lifted and July 15th we can go outside and be normal again. But no one's telling us that right now. Everybody's telling us to just be prepared to do things virtually, especially through the summer. You may have seen some of the guidelines for summer camps. they're pretty stringent. No more than 10 people in a classroom. There's a lot of, we're working with our daycare, our camps in town. Those are just for in-school events that are limiting the amount of kids. I mean, you've all been to an Enfield High graduation. We're talking about 4,000 people on the field. Even if we cut those, even if we only did graduates and staff alone, that's still 500 people. And put that in perspective, 500 was the first limit we were given back in February for the size of events we couldn't have. So the way that the state has been operating on these phases, phase one, we haven't really started yet. That starts May 20th. It's not going to be evaluated for 30 days. So we're talking July 20th for the second phase, August 20th for the third phase. Large gatherings of people are not included in any of those phases. And that came directly from one of the governor's economic aides on the call we had last Wednesday, because a lot of towns and communities were asking about community-wide events like fairs and carnivals and things over the summer. And they basically told this person, don't plan on having them over the summertime. So we're doing the best we can to plan for the worst. I know there's people are going to be unhappy with it, but I just want everyone to know that we're going to give these kids absolutely everything we can. But there's a lot of good ideas being floated out there right now that, are circumstances. They're good ideas, but there's things that we don't control when it comes to holding this in some other manner. So that's where we are when it comes to graduation. It is going to still be, we were able to lock in June 17th, which was our original graduation date for the live stream event. And that will be done on a designated website through the company. So we don't have to put it on ours. And we'll send that out, as well as we're going to have to work with making sure we can broadcast that on television. Aaron was in a meeting with the company today to try to start that process rolling. With regards to our elementary schools, earlier this week, a letter was sent home from each school outlining a packet and library book collection plan. Details have been shared with all families, but the collection began this morning, and they'll continue at each elementary school through noon on Monday, the 18th. Just so you know, for safety reasons, we do have to let the packets that parents are returning sit for a designated period of time, and then we will distribute them to teachers for review and for progress updates. This information is going to be used to help inform instruction, as well as sharing with students, teachers for next fall, so that all teachers coming into next year will have a better understanding of the academic needs of all the children that are progressing from this year's grades. And just a reminder, I'm taking this from the letter, for marking period 3 at the elementary schools, we're going to be using a modified progress report as a narrative report card, and the skills for learning section will be revised to reflect those skills practiced during the distance learning period. We believe the narrative nature of this report card will allow teachers a better way to communicate the progress students are making during this unprecedented time. There will be no retention for any students who were not previously being considered prior to March 12th. Gotten that question a lot. If your child was not being considered for retention prior to our dismissal in March, we will not be retaining any students, and teachers will be working with those kids as we come back at some point in the fall to make sure that we get those kids back up to speed from when they left. And then the big one is obviously next school year. I'm sure by now you've all heard suggestions and requirements that are being floated around regarding our ability to open and open safely next fall. Let me be clear, I have no inside information on this right now. I have no confirmation that these ideas and suggestions and requirements that we're going to have to adhere to in the fall are real. Right now, there's a working group, and they had a live stream conference this past Monday. Was that yesterday? Sorry. Where there's suggestions to make toward the Connecticut Reopen Committee to pass on to the governor on how we would institute in-person classes next fall. It was attended by both K-12 and by higher ed. But there's a lot of ideas that are floating around out there that could be problematic from a logistical standpoint from us. And I say that with the hope and the aspiration that nobody wants our kids back in school more than I do, and nobody wants the only one who may want our kids back in school more than I do are parents and teachers. And everyone is doing everything they can to get our kids back. And we understand that this whole process is going to be detrimental to kids for a while. And it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we do everything we can when they get back to get our kids back to normal. But that said, some of the ideas that are being floated around out there are problematic from a logistical standpoint. You may have heard that one of the recommendations may be no class sizes of more than 10. So logistically, how would we do that? And the best way I can rack my brain around it is there's two ways to do it. One would be just add more classes and keep your class sizes down from whatever they currently are to knock it down to, it'd have to be 9 because the instructor would count. And then if we have paraprofessionals in those classrooms, we'd have to adjust. But just to put in perspective for the board's sake and for anyone watching at home, if we were to have to go that route, just at Henry Barnard alone, just pulling some data from our current structure at Henry Barnard, to keep our class sizes in that building at no more than 10, we would have to add 23 new classrooms and 30 teachers. 23 classroom teachers, and in order to schedule the building with specials, we would need an additional 7 teachers to do that. Keep in mind, this is also probably during the worst economic downturn any of us have ever experienced, and we've already had a conversation about how our budget's going to be flat funded. So let's assume for a moment that money was not an issue, and we were granted the additional teachers that we would need. If you multiply that across the district, we're probably looking at over 300 new staff members. Let's assume we can find 300 new staff members in a short period of time. The part that's logistically impossible is just at Henry Barnard alone, you've all been there, where am I getting 23 new classrooms, physical classrooms in that building to hold classes of less than 10? So the feasibility of doing that, I'm sorry, the feasibility of doing that just doesn't work. There's also another way that's being floated around of doing that, and that would be phasing students in. So let's say you have a class at a kindergarten class that has, for argument's sake, 16 students in it. Well, then 8 of those students would be designated as A block, sort of like the old traditional high school block scheduling. And then the other 8 kids in that class would be B block. And then you would alternate. So on Monday, A block students would go to school. The other 8 students would stay home. Tuesday, B would come in, invite, and so on and so forth. The question is, there would still be, and this was floated around, there would still be an expectation on those days those kids weren't physically in classes that there would be a virtual learning component to this phasing in approach. And one of the many challenges I see with that is if teachers are still in the classroom, they're going to be there 5 days a week, even though they may only have 8 kids. They're going to have a responsibility for the 8 kids in front of them, as well as the 8 kids that are learning remotely. How is that feasible during the regular school hours? Just looking at it from a scheduling perspective, in transportation, how do you socially distance young children on a school bus? Now, granted, if we have to cut the amount of kids that are going, it's probably going to increase our bus fleet. There's an economic impact of that, but there's a real logistical question of who's responsible while they're on that bus to make sure those kids are adhering to social distancing guidelines. And I'm not talking about high school kids. I'm talking about our youngest learners, our kindergartners, and I see Guy's face on here. We were having a conversation today, and you reminded me of, we're talking about social distancing with kids. If you've ever walked through Stowe, you can see kids actually walking, holding onto a rope, so they all stay in line when they're walking down the hallway. That goes against everything that we now know, but that's what we've all been trained on how to do to make sure that we're not losing kids when they're going to the playground or going to the bathroom. So the logistics of how to staff that, bus drivers are responsible for making sure the buses are safe. How are they going to be looking over their shoulder to make sure that kids are staying 6 feet apart? Buses aren't 6 feet wide. How does that work? If you've ever been inside a school bus, the hallway is 18 inches. So it's all those things that we're hoping are going to be considered when some of these recommendations start coming down the pike. There's questions about PPE for staff. There's questions about taking temperatures as kids come in. Who's going to do it? I made Ms. Clark, freak out a little bit today. I said, you're going to have to take every kid's temperature before they come into Enfield High School, and having to take 1,500 kids. We couldn't even get 1,500 kids through the same door, let alone having to take their temperature as they came in. So it's the logistical side. It sounds great until you start looking at the people who have to implement it. So one of the things that's been consistent is that there's still going to be some component of virtual learning in whatever phase that we're asked to do. If you were to ask me my opinion, and as much as it pains me to say this, it should be one or the other. And that's the sentiment of a lot of my colleagues around the Hartford area of, if it's not, we're not a beauty salon. It's not as easy for us to just put up a partition and don't use a hairdryer. Schools are not conducive to social distancing. We can do the best we can, but the challenge that we have is time. We now have 4 months to figure out how this is going to work in September. And what is a better use of our time and our very scarce resources of, do we plan for expecting to be back virtually in September, or do we plan for whatever the guidelines are going to be to socially distance, get us back into school, meaning putting partitions, buying PPE, training our staff, scheduling, phasing in. How is that still going to work? And, oh, by the way, we're still going to have a virtual component, so we're going to have to tighten up what we've already done thus far when it came to the virtual piece of our distance learning. So it is a concern of mine that spending the next 4 months planning for something, so that the sooner that these guidelines can come out, the better it'll be for all of us. But in the meantime, I don't believe that we can wait. There's still going to be, we had this conversation before, and those who are on the board will remember, the pushback we got when we first implemented the iPad program at the high school. But now I think to myself, thank God we did, because if we didn't have iPads at the high school right now, I can only imagine what the position we would be in. I think now's the time for us to start planning to being a true one-to-one device district, because this, and I'm not a doctor, I don't claim to be, but I'm listening to the doctors that are all saying this isn't going away anytime soon. And my biggest fear is, even if we open on time, that at any given point, and Aaron was on a conference call today with school leaders from across the world, in South Korea and Denmark and Sweden and Spain. And some of them are trying the in-person. But what's happening is, if there's one case in your district, you're shut down. So the reality is, we could be very well sitting in the same position at some point next year. And I think we have an obligation that if we are forced to do this again virtually, that when we do, the light switch will be a lot easier. That we can better replicate a school day for our kids from their living room than we're currently doing now. And a big piece of that is access and equity, and making sure every child has a device. So I've tasked our staff, particularly Guy, to start arm wrestling with our folks at Apple, to start getting prices for how we can outfit every student in the district with a device. We've given devices so far to the majority of our families who are in need. There are still families we can't reach. There are families that we're struggling to make contact with. So we know that they're not getting everything. But we're not giving up on that effort. But this process would be a lot more seamless if every kid had a device, so that we can tell that student that at 8 o'clock, turn your device on. And just like we are now, your teacher and your classmates are on the screen. And what I've learned through this process is the device that we're using, the program in Microsoft Teams, is a lot more, there's a lot more capabilities to it than I was aware of, and that we were aware of, to really interact better for a learning environment for all of our students. The reason that we're all learning about it now is because we never thought we would need to use it in this capacity. But as we're starting to become more adept to using it, we're learning the features, for even as far as assignments go. So at the next board meeting, I've got scheduled with Guy and Carrie and John, Dave. They're going to actually take me through, because I'm ignorant to some of these things. I'm used to what my kids are using in a Google platform. But what we currently own does have more capabilities to have a better and seamless virtual program. So once, they're going to have to explain it all to me in a language I can understand. And then we're going to try to turn that presentation into a presentation for you and for the public at what hopefully our next meeting, or if not a following meeting, so that people can start becoming more familiar with what the capabilities are, and then in turn what our expectations would be to make sure the process is a lot smoother. In addition to that, a lot of these ideas are floated up in the air. I have had conversations, and I want to apologize to Senator Kissel on TV. I had a conversation with Representative Hall and with Representative Arnone. And in all honesty, it's easier for me to contact them because I've known them longer, and Mr. Arnone used to be on the board. So I had the wrong number. contact information for Senator Kissel today, but I'm in the office and I got it, so I'm going to reach out to him tomorrow. But one of the things I wanted to express to them was my concerns with some of the things that we're hearing, and both representatives have been extremely helpful through this process. There hasn't been a question I haven't sent to them that if they didn't have an answer, they would forward it immediately on to the chiefs of staff. And there's a hierarchy at the state level right now because they're not in session. And they've all given the commitment that any questions or concerns that we have, they will make sure it gets in front of the governor as best they can. And they've also, I asked if they would be willing to come into a board meeting at some point to start sharing our concerns with them, so they can in turn, when they're permitted to go back in session or working remotely, they can share their concerns with the folks in the state legislative building. So they've all agreed that they're willing to come at some point. The way I kind of left it with them is there's so many things up in the air right now. We're hopeful that in the next week we'll start to get a little bit more concrete plans, and then the conversation could probably be a bit more fruitful with our legislative leaders. And I will reach out to Senator Kissel. I apologize. It was just I had confusion. Kathy sent me the link, and it goes right to the website, so I messed up that, and I apologize. I will reach out to him tomorrow. But as I said, they're more than willing to come and have this conversation with us, so that way our concerns on how this reopening is going to affect all of us can be heard, and they can pass along our concerns like they have traditionally in years past, but typically it's been around the budget. So the last thing in my report, I'm going to ask to break the rules a little bit, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to defer my last point to Mr. Ryder, if that's okay.
No problem. Mr. Ryder, please.
Yeah, something that we were not able to put on tonight's agenda for the special meeting, but that we will be discussing the next time we meet, will be to vote on a last day of school for students. We did have a leadership meeting with the Board of Ed. We're looking to end school for students on Friday, June 12th. And we hope to get that on the agenda for the next meeting, which would be 2 weeks from this evening. So we can get that through. So at least parents will have an idea of an end date, as well as our staff, so that we know 4.5 weeks from now that we know that we're done. We can get into the summer vacations with our families, and the 9 of us with the superintendent will continue to work throughout the summer and figure out what school will look like in the fall. But we at least wanted to get the end date for students, for families, and for our staff out there, so everybody knows when that will be.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. All right, so I'm going to open up for questions for Mr. Drezek, and I'm going to start with Ms. Costa.
I have no questions at this time.
Okay, Mr. Rutledge.
Oh, sorry. First of all, I do seem to be having some video problems. I'm gonna work on that in a minute. Mr. Drezek, I do have one question. We're talking a lot about what might happen next year, and I've been spending the last several months, or seems like several months. It's really only been like a month or so. Reading as much data as I can about this, seeing, what's going on. I'm looking at what states are reopening, what states aren't, things like that. I've actually started reading a lot of studies that are showing that people that have never even shown symptoms of COVID-19 have antibodies, which likely indicates that, one, the death rates are actually much lower than what's actually being reported, and two, that a lot of people may have already been exposed to this but stayed asymptomatic. When I talk to a lot of people in the community about this, one thing I hear is that does the current situation mean that next year, if there's a really bad flu season, are we just going to shut it all down? That's a concern I'm hearing from a lot of people. So I just want to ask, that being said, can you elaborate a little bit more on what you're hearing? And two, is there any point at which we consider, as long as we feel that it could be safe to do so, that we consider pushing back, saying enough is enough, and move forward from there?
So the first part of your question, I'll elaborate a little bit more. The way that the permission to reopen is, the way that it's currently designed, is being advised from a group of a task force And they're ultimately making those decisions that they make recommendations to the governor. Right now, our closure is being administered through an executive order made by the governor. So you can't, if you decided as the Enfield Board of Education, you know what, we want to roll the dice, we're going to go ahead and open tomorrow. It's not happening. That's not legally, you're not permitted to do that. And my suspicion is that any guidance on opening and or closing again is going to probably be through that same channel, meaning it's not going to be your decision, it's going to be those of the governor. With regards to the risk and the amount of infections, and I'm not by any means a public health official. I hear the same things that you guys all hear, and I know there's some debate throughout the country about the effects of this stuff. At the end of the day, we're driven by obviously the executive order, as well as part of that executive order is in consultation with our public health officials. So until a public health official tells us it's clear to go back, regardless of what our opinions are, that's going to be the law of the land. I think as far as expressing personal opinions, if you're hearing from constituents, there are channels to do that up, through the governor's office. And I know there's a dedicated website for questions about things like that. I'm doing the best I can, and I can speak for district personnel to deal with the facts that we have in front of us. And the facts are, we're shut down. We're not going to be permitted to open until they tell us we can. And then when we do, it's going to look a heck of a lot different. So right now, our responsibility is, how do we prepare for whatever the situation is going to be when they ultimately tell us you can come back? My fear is that if we're not prepared and they do open up, and all of a sudden we're not in a position to adhere to all the guidelines they've given us, then we can't open, but then the finger pointing could be done back at us, as opposed to the last thing in the world I ever want to happen is the state to say, well, we told you you can open, but Enfield wasn't prepared. So that puts us at a disadvantage because we have to prepare for the unknown. But, as far as, what people are thinking and taking more risks, my opinion is that's not going to be a decision that's going to be left to us, particularly if we're dealing with children. And another unintended consequence of all of this, regardless of what your own feelings are, is we're going to have to talk about attendance requirements for next year, because there are still going to be people who aren't comfortable sending their kids to school. And I'm basing that just on feedback I'm getting from parents throughout this process. So I think once the general public has a comfort level with getting back to whatever normal is, we'll hopefully start alleviating some of those things. But in the short term, my understanding is that, we're going to be taking the direction from state leaders as to however we're going to survive.
Okay, Mr. Rutledge, you're all set?
Yep.
All right, Mr. Salazar, any questions?
No, I don't have any questions at this time.
Mr. LeBlanc, any questions?
No, thank you, Mr. Superintendent.
Mr. Reiner, any questions?
Yes. I just had a question or suggestion through the chair to the superintendent. If we could do some sort of distance learning survey to the staff as well as the families. I know we're just kind of getting our feet under us right now this week and getting it rolling, but maybe something where we can ask the parents, how's it going? What can we do? Ask the teachers, how can it be enhanced? What would you do different? That kind of thing, just to get an overall perspective from all entities. So if we do this for another 4.5 weeks or more, or we do this again in the fall, I know some parents feel that there's not enough work, some feel overwhelmed, so it's hit or miss. But if we could kind of get some sort of feedback from both students and staff, so we could kind of right the ship even now without even doing it in the fall.
We still, yes, in some capacity, we can and are planning on doing that. One of the hurdles that we're dealing with, and I referenced it earlier when I talked about the platform we're on now in Teams. Well, this is Windstream, but we use Microsoft Teams. We had it, and we were able to get it up and running for video conferencing relatively quickly when we knew we couldn't do in-person meetings anymore. And then we slowly rolled it out for classrooms so that teachers can interact with kids. But what sometimes gets lost in that conversation is that although it was a tool we had, we are remotely trying to train everyone on how to use it, both staff and families. Because as I've said a million times, and I don't want people to sound like a broken record, nobody saw this coming. You know, when we knew this was going to be 2 weeks, we sent home paper packets to say, keep the kids occupied for 2 weeks and we'll collect them when we get back. I don't think anyone, and I'm not just talking about here on this, in this particular meeting, but anyone in the state of Connecticut knew that this was going to continue and wipe out the entire year. So one of the challenges that we're having is we're building while we go. I've used that analogy before, is we're building the plane while we're flying it. And we're getting better. But over the last couple of weeks, even though parents may not have heard from their child's classroom teacher, that's because people like Guy and Carrie Wiley and John Daig are holding webinars with our staff to show them how to use this and having interactive PD with them so that they can roll that out. And the challenge is some are more technologically astute than others, but we also want to make sure that we're using consistency. So what we didn't want to happen was, you know, you got one teacher in one grade who is a wizard at this, and they're off and running and holding all these classes, but then their counterpart in the next virtual classroom is struggling with the technology. So trying to make sure that we roll things out consistently was also a priority for us, because we needed to be, and this started in the beginning with our waiver, you know, access and equity was something that we're going to be judged on. So what that's forced us is that it's made the process a little slower than I think anyone would have liked, but based on the feedback and the interaction that I've seen, even as early as the last few days, you're going to start to see that ramping up a little bit more. And the end product is going to be better than when we started. But I think we want to get to that point where, okay, this is kind of what the new virtual normal is going to look like. How is this working for you? And parents will have something to judge to say, yeah, this is much better than the video on YouTube of my teacher just doing a video, because we didn't have that interaction capability. So yeah, I think right now that May 15th date was sort of that magic number of, this is when we're really going to start ramping it up. And at that point, we have to start gathering feedback from parents and from kids, because if it's not working and teachers, everybody is struggling right now with all of this. And it's not unique to Enfield, it's everywhere. But I think once we have that foundation in place, it'll be a lot better, a lot easier for us to tweak it to make sure that it's working for it. But yes, we're definitely going to solicit it. I know
No, thank you.
like it,
Thank you
but
for that explanation to everybody. Thank you.
people are not shy about sending their input out either. I
know, but I appreciate the explanation so everybody could hear it. Thank you.
Ms. Thurston, any questions? I'm going to take that as a no.
Oh, I thought I hit it. I'm
Okay.
sorry. No, I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hall, any questions?
I think. In the A block, B block that Chris has mentioned, it could also be a split sessions, morning and afternoon, or by the week, every other week going to school. However, any of those problems would create problems for parents, because it looks as though people will be going back to work environments much sooner than schools will be capable of opening. But are those types of things being considered?
Actually, Ms. Hall, I'm glad you mentioned that, because going through my notes of things to include, I actually had a bullet point on here with a giant question mark. What does that mean for parents and daycares? And I skipped it, so I apologize. That is a big concern. You know, for those parents who are fortunate to be able to return to work at some point. You know, what's the expectations that if we do go to a phasing structure and it's every other day, every other week, morning, afternoon session, whatever it may be, you know, what is the impact that's going to have on families who are now, you know, hoping to get back to work physically, and they have to tell their employer, you know, I can only work 2 days this week because my kids are going to be home. that theory in one of the conversations I had, that seemed to be driven more from the high school demographic, because in theory it would be a lot easier for that phasing and that alternate day model for high school kids, because A, they have the technology, they're used to using it, and B, they can be left home alone to do their work if the parents have to go to work themselves. I have great concerns with what that would mean for daycare if we have to do anything than a traditional session. So, we were brainstorming amongst colleagues of ours, and we said, as much as it's gonna come down to, everybody's gonna want to get kids back to school, and the mean old superintendents are gonna say it's got to be all or nothing, because it's just logistically impossible to do all these hypotheticals that are being thrown out right now. So it hasn't gotten to that point yet. We have had an opportunity to have our concerns expressed. Fran Rabinowitz, who's the executive director of CAPS, is actually on the committee. She wasn't initially, but she's a very strong woman, and she forced her way on. So she is taking all of our input for all the superintendents in the state to make sure that voice is being heard for those of us who would actually have to implement these requirements. But thank you for bringing that up. I had it on my list and I forgot to mention that.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Ms.
I
LeBlanc.
have,
Oh, you have one more? Go ahead, Ms. Hall. I'm sorry.
I have two questions, or one comment and a question.
Go ahead.
It
I'm
does
sorry.
seem as though where schools are opening, and that is other countries apparently, more parents are keeping their kids home than are sending them to school for fear. So that's going to be a continued problem. But attendance right now is where my question is. How are we taking attendance, and are we even considering attendance? Collecting the packets may give us some information, but I have been under the impression that if, for example, at this high school, with everybody having an iPad, that when they signed on, it would be able to know whether they were participating or not. What have we done regarding attendance to date?
So there's not a formal attendance program like we have if the kids were here. But as you mentioned, that is one way that we haven't turned a blind eye to attendance. So there are ways, every teacher knows, particularly at the secondary level, when a student has logged on, and they can go in and see if there's if there was an assignment and the child worked on it, if the student worked on it, they can see that. And one of the things that we have since found out about the capabilities of Teams is there's an even stringent attendance mandate built in that, where you can actually sign in and take attendance every morning with a student, or we can see when the students are on their assignments. What we've been doing at all the other levels is based on contact. So if a teacher hasn't had any communication with a student or a family, they're initiating that contact to make sure they're keeping in communication with them. So there's no way to say that, Johnny was on for 3 hours today in grade 1, but if a teacher doesn't hear from Johnny or Johnny's parents in a day or two, they will reach out and make sure they're getting the assignments, they're asking questions, even as far as even making phone calls. If there were parents or students we hadn't heard from when this first started, clerical staff members reached out and were making phone calls to homes. The piece of information we do have is everyone's phone number. So everyone is kind of going above and beyond to make sure that we're making connections with every student as possible. There's not a formal, everybody was here today for this. They do keep record if they are having an in-person sort of Teams meeting for a class. If a student's missing, the teacher will reach out to that particular student and say, I didn't see you on the Teams meeting today. And it could have been an access issue where there's only one device in the house and the student couldn't log on for that particular activity. But teachers and principals are tracking down their students on a daily basis to make sure that we don't lose contact. But you're right, we do need to formalize that process a little bit better.
Anything else, Ms. Hall?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. LeBlanc.
Yep, I just have a couple of comments. I guess we're in a position where we have to hope for the best and prepare for the worst. And the worst would be, not being able to get back in the classroom in the fall. And I worry what that would look like for kindergartners. The first day of school for kindergartners is very special, and it would be quite challenging to have them on, to get them to understand that they're in a virtual learning environment. That's just a comment on my part. A couple things too, if we do go back into the buildings in the fall, I think we're going to have to and we need to have some sort of distancing available. I think we'll have to think of something, or the JFK building committee is going to have to think of something with the space there at JFK. Because although they have the plan in the swing space, we don't know what the state is actually going to say to us if, in fact, we do get to open for the fall. I think too, what's hard about all of this is we can make decisions based on what the government is telling us, and there's only so much we can do, and our hands are tied. And all these phases that are coming out are only going to be, phase 2 is only going to be successful if phase 1 is successful. And if it's not, we're going to, just keep repeating this pattern. So I wish that we all had better answers. And I think that if, I've had conversations with some constituents, and if the state is going to make that decision about virtual learning, I'd hope they'd make it sooner rather than later. And we can spend the summer, and the teachers can spend the summer getting ready. And then if it turns out that we can get back into the building, I'd rather do that than having to flounder around in August trying to figure out how to get everything together. So those are just my comments.
Thank you, Ms. LeBlanc. I'll leave it at common sense will prevail, I guess, but we'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Drezig, for your report. We'll move on to number 5, new business. I need a motion to approve the 2020 Lester J. Bodley Memorial Scholarship recipients, students A and B.
So moved.
Moved by
Second.
Mr. Rutledge, seconded by Ms. Costa. Any discussion? So like I said, we're approving student A and B, which will be announced at the virtual awards event that they're going to have next month.
June 10th.
June 10th. Thank you. Any other discussion? Can we have roll call, please?
Mr. LeBlanc,
4,
Mr. Salazar,
4,
Mr. Rutledge,
4,
Mrs. Costa,
4,
Mrs. LeBlanc. Mrs. Hall,
4,
Mrs. Thurston,
yes,
Mr. Ryder,
4.
Chairman Krizel.
4.
Motion passes.
Thank you. 5B, motion to approve the 2020 Safe Grant contribution of $1,000.
Second.
Who said so moved? Ms. Hall?
yes.
Ms. Hall said so moved, seconded by Ms. LeBlanc. So we're going to contribute $1,000 to the Safe Grant. Any discussion? Sensing none, roll call, please.
Mr. LeBlanc,
4,
Mr. Salazar,
4,
Mr. Rutledge,
4,
Mrs. Costa,
4,
Mrs. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mrs. Hall,
4,
Mrs. Thurston,
yes,
Mr. Ryder,
4.
Chairman Krizel.
4.
Motion passes.
Thank you. 5C, motion to approve the 2020-2021 Head Start COLA and Quality Improvement Grants. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Ms.
Second.
Hall.
Yes.
Seconded by who?
me,
Oh, Ms. Thurston. Thank you.
thanks.
Any discussion? It was in our packet.
I have a comment.
Please, Ms. Hall.
I am always overwhelmed with how successful they do their programs with what is a relatively small amount of money. So I congratulate Head Start on making money go as far as it does.
Compare us against the field, Miss Hall. We're doing great.
Any other discussion? Sensing none, roll call, please.
Mr. LeBlanc,
4,
Mr. Salazar,
4,
Mr. Rutledge,
4,
Mrs. Costa,
4,
Mrs. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mrs. Hall,
4,
Mrs. Thurston,
yes,
Mr. Ryder,
4.
Chairman Krizel.
4,
Motion passes.
thank you. And 5D, a motion to approve the Adult Education Program Improvement Transition Grant for 2020-2021. Do I have a
so
motion?
moved,
Moved by Ms.
Second.
Thurston.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Hall. Any discussion? Again, it's in our packet.
I have a comment.
Please, Ms. Hall.
The amount of money in this case is again relatively small, but the requirements and the list of what they must be sure to attain is so long and so complicated that it seems above and beyond what's necessary. But I certainly do approve and want to continue this program.
Mr. Drezek, would you like to
I
answer?
that often the time when it comes to the amount of effort that goes in to procure the amount of funding that's available, but I think we're all in on this one, so I would recommend that we move forward with it.
Any other discussion? Sensing none, roll call, please.
Mr. LeBlanc,
4,
Mr. Salazar,
4,
Mr. Rutledge,
4,
Mrs. Costa,
4,
Mrs. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mrs. Hall,
4,
Mrs. Thurston,
yes,
Mr. Ryder,
4.
Chairman Krizel.
Yes, or 4, either.
Motion
Yes.
passes.
Thank you. All right, so we're gonna move to number 6, board member comments, and I'm gonna use the same way we went. So I'm gonna start with Ms. Costa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to keep my comments brief, seeing as we have 3 months of expenditure certifications to go through later. I think it can't be said enough that we're appreciative of the efforts made by faculty, administration, and support staff for everything that they're going through right now, and a special shout out to parents and students for their patience and hard work. But there are 3 other things I'd like to talk about. And the first is a bright spot in an otherwise bleak pandemic time. And I don't know if I could do this successfully, but it was so exciting to go by JFK and see the construction trailers moved onto the site for the renovation project. And with the cancellation of traditional school for the rest of the year, they should be able to get a head start on the summer construction. I know when they presented the plan to us a few weeks ago, it's a pretty aggressive plan. And a lot of things have to get done each summer so that it's ready for the kids to return to school in September. So hopefully that will be helpful to the construction crew. Given the size and importance of this project, I'd like to suggest or recommend that as part of our committee reporting, we have a little bit more formal reporting around this particular project. I'd like to, over the course of the 2.5 or 3-year project, that we have 10 or 12 key deliverables that we are constantly reporting on to the community. Things that are meaningful to students and parents, like when we expect the cafeteria to be serving its first meals or whatever. I don't want to make it excessive, but I think it's important that we keep our eye on this project. And I know the committee will come and do regular updates, but I just think a little quick red or green chart even on certain deliverables that are important to the students would be helpful. I'm more than willing to volunteer to work on this and whatever. The second thing I'd like to talk about was something that I brought up when our leadership met last week. And that is, I think it would be a good idea for us to form a special committee to help in the ensuring that the Enfield schools are ready to open in September, following guidelines that we think are appropriate and of course in line with whatever state mandates. I'm not as convinced as others that they're going to issue any particular guidelines within any reasonable time frame, quite frankly. Nor do I think they can. We just don't have enough information. But just things like, PPE and hand sanitizers and busing, and what do we do about lunches if you can't have cafeterias, and whatever the topics are. Maybe have somebody from building and grounds on there for things we have to do in the schools. I don't consider this day-to-day operations. I mean, this is a very unusual circumstance. And I think a broad team of diverse individuals can work together and at least make sure we're considering everything we need to consider. I recognize that there could be a decision made that's out of our control about whether we're going to open or not. But I don't think we can wait for that decision to decide to take action. It's our mission and responsibility to give our students a quality public education. And I think we need to be all over this for the next 4 months. And then the last thing I'd like to suggest, and everybody, hope you don't have your rotten tomatoes ready in your kitchens or wherever you are, is the BOE meeting schedule. Given where we are right now and with the constant barrage of new information, I'd like to suggest that we not only reinstate our summer meetings, but that we start meeting weekly, at least until the end of this school year. I think we can use those meetings to keep up to date on what's going on for all our school year-end activities. Maybe we could use it as an opportunity to showcase some students that might otherwise not get recognized at various events that might have been held. Get updates from the new committee if we so choose to have that committee. And just having another communication vehicle to the community besides robocalls on what's happening. I don't think now is the time to sit back and wait for someone else to tell us what to do and how to do it. We owe it to our children and our parents. And I think I've said enough now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Costa. Mr. Rutledge. You're muted, Mr. Rutledge.
Oh, there we go. I think I must have muted myself instead of unmuting myself. So thank you. Now, obviously, the last several weeks has been very trying and difficult for a lot of people across the town, across the state, across the country. It's definitely something most of us have not experienced in our lifetimes before. Hopefully, we can keep hope that it never will again. But, it's always a good idea to be prepared for the worst. If you try to look at one silver lining, though, to all this, but please take this with a grain of salt, of course, is that, I think a lot of people have had to start to navigate and learn a lot better how to use technology. Just look at how we're meeting right now. Instead of meeting at those in those chairs at the town council chambers, we're using virtual meeting technology. People are working from home who hadn't worked from home before. We're using technologies like this, like Zoom meetings, like WebEx, like all sorts of different things that, bring people together as a way to communicate. And I think no place is more important than that than in our government. Mr. Drezek, I want to thank you for looking into this. I did see the message that Guy forwarded you for me. I think it's very important that not only that government be public, but it be accessible. Especially during times of crisis. It's easy to lead when things are going hunky-dory and everything's going swell and, there aren't any real major problems. But, the fortitude of a leader can be defined sometimes by how well they handle themselves during situations like this and how well they put themselves out there for the public to show that they're accessible. Quite frankly, I would like to see, this board consider using this technology on a regular basis, even when we are meeting in person, to allow people to communicate publicly to us. I've talked about ideas for this before, but the fact that so many people are now using these virtual meeting technologies, I think I see very little reason why we should not be able to open up these meetings and add a public communications section to these meetings, as long as people have the share link for them to join in. So I believe, from what I've gathered, because I've talked to a lot of people that have used this technology can be used for incredibly large meetings. I am hoping that this is something that we can consider. Maybe it's something we consider in policy. Maybe it's something that's considered in leadership. But regardless, I think it's time we start looking for ways to re-involve people in their local government. And, I'm hoping that especially if we're going to go to weekly meetings, maybe at some of those, we start opening it up to public comments and allow people to join via this this digital means. But that's all I had. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rutledge. I know that was brought up, and I think we got legal looking into that too. So we're working on it. So thank you, Mr. Rutledge. Mr. Salazar.
Well, first of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, I would like to say that I concur with my colleagues, the ones that have spoken so far. I think that having regular meetings moving forward it's going to be of a lot of use and benefit. At least I expect that it would be, and I hope that the community can take advantage of that in having us, accessible and providing them the information that I hope would be of interest to them. I also agree on the forming the subcommittee. So I want to, I know we're not voting on that, but I just wanted to express my opinion on it. I think it's necessary. I think it's a good idea, and I would certainly welcome and support that option. And lastly, regarding the comments, that's again another idea that I support, and thank you for updating us on it being reviewed. But I am one of the opinion that it should be something that's allowed. Moving beyond that, I may be restating the obvious, but I think as we make plans for, whatever school is going to look like come the next year, we already know that the school year is, for all intents and purposes, a shot now. As we make plans, we need to be conscious of the fact that not only the schools are being affected, right? As you and the rest of my colleagues know, I work here in town, and we're looking forward, as per the governor's orders, to be going back to work on the 20th. But even that means that we can at most have 30 to 50% of the workforce as it pertains to the office environment. We also are limited to having no more than 5 people in any congregation. So meetings, cafeterias, all of that is going to be impacted the same way. And again, I may be restating the obvious, but as we make plans, we need to take into account that the parents are also going to be affected in a very similar fashion as the students. So we have to keep that in our minds as well. And then lastly, I want to make two comments. We're saying here that maybe we will open this up for comments to the public, but there's obviously a way to, all of them can reach us. And I want to thank for those that are maybe watching today or maybe watching at a later time. I appreciate the comments that are being brought to our attention, people's opinions. And I just want to underscore that we're always available to hear you out. It is not likely that we're going to engage in conversations over on Facebook, but the town's website has our information for how they can access us. And, that's fine at enfield-ct.gov. So I encourage people that may be wondering, how do I express my opinion or my idea, or how do I get these folks to listen to me? We would be happy. I think, well, I won't speak for the rest, but I assume that we're on the same page. We would be happy to hear from you, and you can find our contact information, and we're always available. And final comment is that Enfield's Kite organization, it has a campaign that they started, I believe, 2, maybe 3 weeks ago, regarding the One Community. I assume that you, my colleagues on the board, have heard about it. It's to benefit Enfield the Enfield Food Shelf and Loaves and Fishes. And that's of assistance to the community for those that are in need. And obviously, a lot of our students fall into that category. A lot of students' families fall into that category. So if you're looking for an opportunity or a way to contribute and to help out our community here in Enfield, you should look at the enfieldkite.gov and look into the campaign. And it's basically you can make a donation to this one campaign, one community campaign, and they're matching funds. So you can double your donation for all intents and purposes. So I encourage anybody that wants to help out the community and that has a inkling to do so to check out enfieldkite.org. I think it's a great campaign that is taking place. And again, it's not just the community at large, but specifically it could be of a lot of help to some of our students, which we're focusing on. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those are my comments.
Yes, and the website for our emails is enfieldpublicschools.org. And our emails are under the BOE page. And the one community is under enfieldkite.org, all one word, enfieldkite.org. If
Correct.
you could donate the $10 for that is greatly appreciated.
Or any amount for that matter.
Or any amount. Thank you, Mr. Salazar. Mr. LeBlanc.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a statement that I'd like to go ahead and say as I've been looking forward into the future. So here we go. As we look towards the future, we as a society and a country need to rip the Band-Aid off and look ourselves in the mirror long and hard. Education has been one of the most talked about issues, and rightfully so. One thing needs to be very clear: distant or virtual learning does not replace the education of being in a school building. The given situation has called for us to close our school doors and to move towards packets and online learning for the time being. But the lesson here has been distance learning has led to an extreme burden on some teachers, parents, and most importantly, the students. While safety towards our faculty, staff, and students is always the top priority, we need to do everything we can to ensure our students return to school buildings. When school does resume, I hope on time in the fall, we need to use everything in our power to make it as normal as possible for our kids. Although the primary reason is always education, schools provide so much more. This includes extracurricular clubs, theater, athletics, and the simple act of socializing and building friendships. To not have any of these is taking a toll on our children, which goes into a whole nother conversation of addressing, evaluating, and managing our students' mental health. Because this virus has and will continue to touch a lot of people mentally before it ever does physically. Our children need their teachers back, their coaches back, their mentors back, as the bond between them is priceless. Reasons like this are why this virus cannot be the only thing we talk about. We need to seriously ask ourselves what kind of society and educational institution we want to return to. And to be honest, if you think that a future that has less brick and mortar schools and more distant or virtual learning is the way to go, then you are cheating our future generations. Rather than looking to see what we can't do in our school buildings, we need to start figuring out what we can do and adjust and adapt accordingly to make these possible. We need to protect lives while also protecting livelihoods. If it means hand sanitizer in every classroom, daily disinfecting of rooms, and temporary measures such as proper PPE and keeping desks 6 feet apart, along with other future guidelines, then we all need to work as hard as we can to manage this and give families and staff the confidence needed to be in the buildings. With this said, I'm gravely concerned about some of the proposals the state is putting out right now. The majority of these proposals are not feasible, and to be quite frank, downright silly. Education is a crucial part of our democracy and ensures continued growth and success of our country. In Enfield, we value our educational system and the importance of a high school diploma. We cannot fail our kids when it comes to a proper, well-rounded education. We are seriously risking permanent educational damage if we continue down this road. We can't fear living life. Therefore, if we cannot sit here and start coming up with real solutions with individuals such as our state leaders, co-educational boards, and even the CIAC, we might as well not even be sitting here as elected officials because there'll be nothing to go back to. This is absurd. But I'm here tonight to say I will not sit quiet and let our educational system fall apart. I believe we have all the right tools and people for Enfield to be a leader in this. We did what we were asked and we flattened the curve. Therefore, we proved we can do this smartly and cohesively. And now it's the time to do it both in the interest of safety and learning. We owe that much to our students, parents, and for the future of this town, state, and country. If there's one thing I'm confident in, it's that our best days are ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc. Mr. Ryder.
Okay. So to reiterate, we'll add to the agenda, hopefully, voting to close schools for students for distance learning, et cetera, on Friday, June 12th. Also, like Mr. Jezik said earlier, I just want to remind all K-5 families to turn in their packets. All distance learning packets from phases 1, 2, and 3, distant learning days 1 through 29, can be returned at all 6 of the K-5 schools, now through Monday, May 18th at noon. I also wanted to thank the Enfield High School PE department and coaches, and to remind everybody that you can sign up today for hashtag Enfield Moves. It's a virtual 1K or 5K that you can sign up and you can walk or run with your family starting on the 14th of May. You have until the 18th of May to complete either a 1K or a 5K. You can sign up, registration is free. You can download and print your own virtual bib, walk with your family. Again, it's free. Log your miles. You can choose to send in a picture of yourself and your family to an email address that's listed on the website. You can get all this information on enfieldpto.com or the Enfield PTO Facebook page, also from the EHS PE Instagram site. So that's something fun that you can do outside now that yesterday's weather is over. Hopefully the weather will improve now through the weekend. Also, I wanted to take a moment to thank the Enfield Teachers Association. I saw that they donated over $8,000 just this week to the Enfield Food Shelf and Enfield Loaves and Fishes. $2,000 each was granted to each of those organizations. They also donated $2,000 to the class of 2020 and all the things going on around graduation, whether it's our virtual graduation, signage, just extra to go towards the pot, to go towards the class of 2020 celebration that's coming up in June. And also an additional $2,000 in different other community needs that they saw fit. And I wanted to thank the Enfield Teachers Association for that. As far as the meetings that Wendy mentioned, increasing our meetings, et cetera, I just wanted to say that I personally, I know Tina as well, but I personally don't wait for these meetings twice a month through Enfield PTO and talking to citizens, et cetera, all that stuff, virtually or otherwise. So, for example, Enfield Public Schools Facebook page had 5 posts last week. Enfield PTO had 84. We communicate everything that comes from the principals. We retweet it, repost it on all kinds of social media outlets. I don't think any of us wait, for these twice a month meetings to do that. I know, like I said, I communicate with people over a dozen times a day through that, and they all know how to reach me. One thing we could do is, in addition to our names being here on the screens while we are meeting virtually, where it says my name, you could put my Enfield Schools email address like it does on ETV when we do meet for real at Town Hall. So we could just add that email to all of our squares. And that way, even while watching this, they could have it in front of them to email us. As a parent of 2 children in the Enfield Public Schools, I want to thank my teachers, my children's teachers. I know that for my 3rd grader, my 6th grader, it has been very challenging, to be a teacher and to be a dad. My wife is fortunate enough to still be working full time. So she's up in her room with the door closed all day long on phone calls and virtual meetings. So a lot of that teaching has fallen on me. So to all the parents out there, I am with you personally. And some days are easy. There's work to do. Everybody stays busy. Some days, like this week, we're kind of relearning Teams, kind of doing that for our families that just got a device recently. So they haven't had the chance to work on Teams. So while they kind of get caught up on how the device works, things have slowed just a touch for some of the other families. So today we might have only had 20 minutes of work to do in our general classroom, but we also had specials added. So you can make up by doing Mr. Casada's 10 music videos that he posted for us to watch, or Mr. Crandall's PE videos that he posted for us to watch. So there might be a little less from classroom 15 on Teams, but there's more from our specialists because now they're getting up to speed as well on all this stuff. We got a 5-page PDF that I downloaded from our art teacher, at Eli Whitney specifically. So we can do that to fill in the days. So none of this is easy, but I wanted to thank the parents. I wanted to thank the teachers, and I wanted to thank central office and their staff. And that's why I asked Mr. Dresdick what I asked him earlier about polling. I just wanted everybody to hear these answers. I mean, the 9 of us might hear something that doesn't get to everybody. So sometimes we ask a question that we know the answer to because we want you guys to hear it as well as residents. So thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. He did add your email, but I'm watching it on YouTube at the same time, and you literally need a microscope to see the name. It's so small in the corner. So I don't know if there's a way to change the size of it, but anyway.
Yeah, I just no. When Wendy mentioned that, or when somebody mentioned that earlier, I just thought, well, we could add it to that. But you're right. It's not easy to read, but
Yeah.
Feel free to reach out to us in any way you can.
Well, like I said, all our emails are on the website. We have a BOE page that lists all the members and their emails and their phone numbers and addresses. So reach us that way is fine too. So thank you, Mr. Ryder. Mrs. Thurston.
Just real quick, I do want to thank Chris and all the teachers and Andy and everybody for all the work that you guys have been doing, keeping us all updated. I know it definitely has not been easy. I don't think I would want to be in your shoes. I'm glad everybody is safe. I know the robocalls have been helping. I know the Facebook and the, Tina and Scott, the retweeting and everything that they've been doing. People are definitely getting the message and, getting their voices out there. As far as the meetings, I agree with Mrs. Costa about keeping the summer ones meeting weekly. I don't know if right now we need to do that. What? Oh, sorry. But I definitely, think we should keep the summer meetings. I guess that's it.
Thank you, Ms. Thurston. Ms. Hall.
Somewhere I read this particular suggestion for summer work with children. I can't find the reference again, but I'd like to bring it to our attention. It was a suggestion that perhaps small groups of those students who have suffered the most because they weren't in school, the other able to sped group for what we have in the Eagle Academy would be served well by having small meetings with their teachers during the summer, where in person rather than by remote. But again, based on our conversation this evening and everything else I've read recently, even that may be too difficult to fulfill. Second issue, the Lieutenant Governor has proposed a COVID-19 computing challenge, which she wants to address to grades 3 through 12 to participate by coming up with a plan that could be implemented with computer technology, including apps, websites, and/or computer programs that assist to defeat the spread of the disease, aid our communities, or encourage and inform everyone. She is not expecting all of the students to be programming geniuses or anything, but the ideas that they express could be included in their program. The information is online, and there are flyers for parents, for students, and for teachers. However, when I tried to open those flyers, I couldn't get them to open on my computer. So either it was very popular that particular time, or there's a problem with the website. But that is available. And I will send the address to all of you, because if I hold it up at the screen at the moment, nobody be able to read it anyway. And we can spread it to our students if you think there are people that might be available. Thanks to everybody who's working so diligently and agonizingly to make this school's year better for all of our students. Keep working, everybody.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Ms. LeBlanc.
Yeah, I just have a few things. I, like Scott, have been getting a lot of emails or phone calls from parents in the community. I think that if I can say something to the parents tonight and the students and the teachers, there's no handbook that tells us what to do during a situation like this. And I don't want the parents to be too hard on themselves right now. Some parents are juggling the distance learning in their own jobs or may have lost a job. And I think that everyone is being hard on themselves. I think the students are being hard on themselves. I think the parents are being hard on themselves. We're all learning. I know that teachers are managing distance learning, plus taking care of their families as well. So there's no guidebook that says we're doing this right, but I think everybody's doing a good job, and I think everybody's heart is in the right place. I can't stress enough that even though we all might agree or see some disagreements, is that everybody's heart is in the right place. One of the things that we have to understand is that if we are able to open up the buildings in the fall, I think Jonathan might have said it earlier that this virus has taken an emotional toll on not just the parents, but on the kids. So we need to be prepared for that. There's many services in town that can help people who are struggling. But for the most part, I really appreciate everybody taking their time to reach out to me. I'm here to listen. I'm here to help. I might not always have answers and I can't always fix something, but I can be here to listen. I appreciate all the work the teachers are doing and the parents are doing. I want to just add about graduation. I'm heartbroken for these kids. I'm only a year out from, I had one graduate last year. And so, we can't replace anything that they're missing this year. Unfortunately, what makes me sad is that our hands are tied. We pretty much want to give everything the kids want, and we can't, and that makes me sad. But I wish there was something else we could do as far as like having us all have some sort of traditional graduation. And I understand after our meeting last week that right now that's just not possible. So I just want to thank central office for keeping us in the know with everything that's going on the state level. And it's always nice to see the 9 of you, well, 11, 12 of you every other week, and see that you're all healthy and that we're all working hard. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LeBlanc. Well, I'm going to let my banner here say it all. Thank you to all the parents and staff for educating Enfield's children. We couldn't do it without you. We couldn't do it without the staff, the parents. We understand that this is a difficult time. But thank you, thank you. That's all I can say about that. I want to go off a different tangent here. I know that, we're working at May 20th, could be the first phase of opening up some businesses and stuff. But I just don't understand. You got large box stores open like Home Depot and Walmart, letting people in one at a time. But yet the little mom and pop stores that are that's their business, their livelihood, their survival, are being forced to stay closed. And
except package stores.
Package stores, yes. Well, that's important these times, but I will leave that at that. But anyway, I'm directing to our leaders in Hartford that I know we have to do it safely. I know we have to think what we're doing, but we got it. Like I said earlier, somehow common sense is being thrown out the window, and we have to think with some common sense on how we can get our economy back up and going. But again, I'm going off on a tangent, so we'll leave it at that. And everybody, all 8 of you hit a different subject, and I think we've hit every nail on the head here. And some of them were passionate subjects, some of them were informative, some of them were thankful, some of them were passing on websites. And so I hope that we can continue these meetings and bring you any information and all information as soon as we get it, and in a timely manner. And we will address the last day of distant learning at our next meeting. And I say we leave it at that. So let's move on to board committee reports. Sorry, board committee reports. Curriculum, Mr. Salazar.
Just to let you know that we will be holding our first meeting since we're relegated to being at home because through COVID. So we're going to be having our first meeting, virtual meeting next week on the 21st.
And you're moving that to 5:30, I thought, too. Also,
That is
right?
correct. Yes.
Okay. Numbers. Next one, finance, Ms. Costa.
Yep, the Finance Committee met last night virtually, of course. We reviewed our year-to-date expenses, the nutrition financials. We went further into grants, and we started discussing what the financial impact of this coronavirus has had on our current expenses. Obviously, way too early to determine how it's going to impact us next year.
And you just reminded me, nutrition. It's a godsend that what that staff is doing over at the high school at JFK with
Yes, it is.
providing meals for our citizens, for our children, I should say. So thank you to them for their hard work. Policy, Mr. Rutledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're meeting next Tuesday, the 19th.
At what time?
5:30 p.m. at this point.
5:30, okay. Leadership, we met last Friday, which we broke a record there. We've never had meetings on Friday before, so. And to discuss things that were addressed at this meeting, so. Joint facility is meeting this Thursday to discuss some different things. We're looking into a solar plan for the town. We're still trying to get the 3rd phase of Barnard Roof done, and we're looking into what we can do with the other schools with our financial situation that we're in. But everything's on the table, and we're trying to do what we can. JFK, as Wendy mentioned, they did deliver the trailers, and I know that they're looking at possibly starting sooner than later. I'm not sure if we're having a meeting this Thursday or not. I did not hear anything yet, so we'll inform. There'll be something on the website about the agenda if there is one. Joint security, Mr.
Joint
Ryder,
security
go ahead.
met last on May 6th, and we'll be meeting again on June 3rd.
Yeah, there was an issue with our security plan, and I think that was approved.
It was.
We had a problem with joint facilities on our phase 3 Barnard Roof, so I'm hoping that resolves that. And we haven't met any insurance at this point. I don't know if one is even scheduled, so. Any other committees that I know of? That you know of, sorry. All right, we're gonna try to do this approval of minutes as quickly as possible. So we're gonna, I need a motion to approve the special BOE meeting minutes of March 10th, 2020.
So moved.
Moved by Ms.
Second.
Hall, seconded by Ms. Thurston.
All in favor,
Everybody,
say aye.
if you're in favor, just say aye. If they're opposed, no. So in favor,
Aye.
Aye.
opposed? The ayes have it.
One
Yeah.
abstention.
One abstention.
I wasn't there.
Mr. Rutledge. Regular BOE meeting minutes of March 10th. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Ms.
Second.
Hall, seconded by Ms. Thurston. Any discussion? In favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Aye.
Okay, so we have one abstention, Mr. Rutledge. And the last special Board of Ed meeting minutes of April 28th, 2020. Do I
So
have a
So
moved.
moved.
moved by
Second.
Mr. Rutledge, seconded by Ms. Thurston. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. Oh, that was easier than I thought. Now we get to number 9, Ms. Costa, approval of accounts and payroll for the months of February, March, and April 2020. Everybody mute their phones and have an act because she's gonna talk.
Oh.
We're gonna see just how fast I can talk. Okay, the Finance Committee met virtually on May 11th, 2020 to review financial statements for the month of February year to date and to examine various documents related to finances. Our review concluded that there is nothing significant to report to the board. I therefore move we accept the superintendent's certification as follows. I hereby certify in the month of February, total expenditures amount to $5,853,765.93, broken down between payroll totaling $4,205,056.83 and other accounts totaling $1,648,709.10. All payments have been made in accordance with the approved budget and are properly accounted for within the books of accounts. Copies of approval for check invoices are properly documented.
Second.
Do I have a motion? Or motion by Ms. Costa. Do I have a second?
I did.
Second from Ms. Hall. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. Ms. Costa.
Certification of grants and Head Start expenditures. Finance Committee met virtually on May 11th, 2020 to review financial statements for grants during the month of February year to date and to examine various documents related to finances. Our review concluded that there is nothing significant to report to the board. I move we accept the superintendent's certification as follows. I certify that in the month of February, the total grant and Head Start expenditures amount to $349,125.81, broken down between payroll totaling $312,165.51 and other accounts totaling $36,960.30. All payments have been made in accordance with the approved budget and are properly accounted for within the books of accounts. Copies of approval for check invoices are properly documented.
Motion by
Second.
Ms. Costa, seconded by Ms. Hall. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Ms. Costa.
Finance Committee virtually met on May 11th, 2020 to review financial statements for the month of March year to date and to examine various documents related to finances. Our review concluded that there is nothing significant to report to the board. I move that we accept the superintendent's certification as follows. I hereby certify that in the month of March, total expenditures amount to $5,552,771.03, broken down between payroll totaling $4,263,554.80 and other accounts totaling $1,289,216.23. All payments have been made in accordance with the approved budget and are properly accounted for within the books of accounts. Copies of approval for check invoices are properly documented.
Motion by Ms. Costa, seconded by Ms. Hall. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Ms. Costa.
Certification of grants and Head Start expenditures. The Finance Committee met virtually on May 11th, 2020 to review financial statements for grants during the month of March year to date and to examine various documents related to finances. Our review concluded that there is nothing significant to report to the board. I move we accept the superintendent's certification as follows. I hereby certify that in the month of March, the total grant and Head Start expenditures amount to $566,943, broken down between payroll totaling $314,110.03 and other accounts totaling $252,832.97. All payments have been made in accordance with the approved budget and are properly accounted for within the books of accounts. Copies of approval for check invoices are properly documented.
Motion by
Second.
Ms. Costa, seconded by
Me,
who said it?
I did.
Ms. Hall.
Hmm.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Ms. Costa.
Finance Committee virtually met on May 11th, 2020 to review financial statements for the month of April year-to-date and to examine various documents related to finances. Our review concluded that there is nothing significant to report to the board. I move we accept the superintendent's certification as follows. I hereby certify that in the month of April, total expenditures amount to $6,425,088.72, broken down between payroll totaling $4,085,832.77 and other accounts totaling $2,339,255.95. All payments have been made in accordance with the approved budget and are properly accounted for within the books of accounts. Copies of approval for check invoices are properly documented.
Motion by Ms. Costa,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Thurston. Any
It's not a
discussion?
race.
I got there first, though.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Ms. Costa, one more?
The Finance Committee met virtually on May 11th, 2020 to review financial statements for grants during the month of April year-to-date and to examine various documents related to finances. Our review concluded that there is nothing significant to report to the board. I move we accept the superintendent's certification as follows. I hereby certify that in the month of April, the total grant and Head Start expenditures amount to $326,327.14, broken down between payroll totaling $294,588.39 and other accounts totaling $31,738.75. All payments have been made in accordance with the approved budget and are properly accounted for within the books of accounts. Copies of approval for check invoices are properly documented.
Motion by
Second.
Ms. Costa, seconded by, who said that?
I did.
Ms. Hall. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Do we have any line transfers, Ms. Costa?
We do not.
Number 10, correspondence and communications.
There is none.
I just want to add for communications, I want to thank Guy Barassa and the ETV staff for putting this together. This is not the way to meet. I miss you all. I wish we could do it in council chambers. But as I said earlier, our hands are tied by powers that be that are above us, so. Motion to adjourn. Ms.
Motion
Thurston.
to adjourn.
Moved by Ms. Thurston, seconded.
Second.
Second by Ms. Costa. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you all very much.
Bye.
We'll see you soon. I miss you all. Thank you.
Thank you,
Good
guys.
night.
Thank you all.
Aye.